Chapter 15 of The Beloved Vagabond by William John Locke. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 15. Thus the three of us were again separated. Blanquette was enjoying herself among the pigs and ducks of La Haye, whence she wrote letters in which her joy in country things mingled with anxiety as to the neglected condition of the master. I led a pleasant but somewhat nervous life in Somersetshire, spending hours in vain attempts to reconcile the cosmic views of Paragot and an English vicar, and learning sometimes with hot humiliation the correctitudes of English country vicarage behaviour. And Paragot, his long legs dangling on each side of his donkey, rode, as I thought, picturesquely vagrant through the leafy byways of France. A fortnight after my arrival, however, he informed me by letter of his resolve to stay in Paris. He had failed to find an ass of the true vagabond character. The ideal ass, he sought, should be a companion as well as a means of locomotion. He would not take an urban donkey into the country against its will. To force any creature, man, woman, or ass, out of the groove of its temperament were a crime of which he could not be guilty. Then again, Narcisse did not enter into the spirit of the pilgrimage. He laid his head along his forepaws and glowered sullenly instead of barking with enthusiasm. Again, when he announced his intention of leaving Paris, Hercule groaned aloud, and Madame Boin wept so profusely that, sitting beneath her counter, he'd had to put up a borrowed umbrella. Cazalet, too, and a few others too poor for railway fares, were staying in town. Also, the Café Delphine had spoiled him for the horrible alcohols of wayside cafes. And, lastly, what did it matter where the body found itself, so long as the soul had its serene habitations? The letter depressed me. I was beginning to see Paragot with the eyes of a man. I felt that this inability to carry out an inspiration was a sign of decay. The springs of action had weakened. Though the spirit thirsted for sweet things, habit chained him to the squalor of the Café Delphine. When the quiet Somersetshire household knelt round the drawing-room for evening prayers, I speculated on the stage of intoxication at which my lonely master had arrived. I was a million miles from speculating on what was really happening, and when I received a curt, uncharacteristic note from Paragot a fortnight later, begging me to return to Paris at once, a day or two before the formal expiry of my visit, it only occurred to me that he might be ill. The crowded train steamed into the Gare Saint-Lazare at 7:30 in the morning. I was desperately anxious to get to Paragot, and bag in hand I stood with a sickening feeling of suspense by the open door, waiting for the train to slow down. I sprang out. In an instant the line of porters were odd dots of blue in the throng that swarmed out of the carriages. I became a mere ant in the heap, and struggled with the others towards the barrier. After giving up my ticket, I set down my bag to rest my strained arm for a minute, and looked around me. Then I noticed a stranger approaching, whose smiling face had an air of uncanny familiarity. Where had I seen the long, gaunt man before? He wore a silk hat and a frock coat. My acquaintance with silk-hatted gentlemen in Paris was limited. I picked up my bag. "Ah, my little Astico!" cried the stranger. "How good it is to see you!" I dropped my bag. I dropped my jaw. I would have dropped my brains had they been loose. This cadaverous image of respectability was Paragot, but a Paragot transmogrified beyond recognition even by me. His hair was cropped short, his face was clean-shaven. On his transfigured head shone a flat-brimmed silk hat. He wore a villainously fitting frock coat buttoned across his chest, with long wrinkly creases stretching horizontally from each button. His hands were encased in lemon-coloured gloves a size too large for him. When he extended his hand, even my bewilderment did not blind me to the half-inch of flat, dead tips to the fingers. Beneath his arm was an umbrella, on a broiling August morning. He wore spats in midsummer. His trousers were fawn-coloured. I could only gape at him as he wrung me by the hand. "You are surprised, my son?" "I did not expect you to meet my train, master," said I. "If one could anticipate all the happenings of life, it would lose its fascination. My son, go your way and do your duty, but believe in the unexpected." "But what has happened? I asked, again surveying his ill-fitting glory. "The Comte de Verneuil is dead," he answered. "Are you going to his funeral?" "In these?" he cried, holding up the lemon kids. "And this cravat?" I noticed that he wore a floppy purple tie adorned with yellow spots outside the lapels of his coat. It required more than 2 glances to take in all his detail. "Besides," he added, "my distinguished patient was buried a fortnight ago." He looked at me with an amused smile, enjoying my mystification like a child. "You didn't know me?" "No, master." I rubbed my eyes. "In fact, I scarcely recognize you now." "That is because I am again Gaston de Nerac," said he magnificently. I had an idea that he must have come into the family fortune. But what had the death of the Comte de Verneuil to do with it? I picked up my bag again and walked with him to the exit. The hurrying crowd of passengers by my train, and of clerks and workpeople pouring from suburban platforms, rendered conversation impossible. At the station gates, Parago stood and watched the brisk life that swarmed up and down the Rue Saint-Lazare and the Rue du Havre. Paris awakens a couple of hours earlier than London. Clerks hurried by with flat leather portfolios under their arms. Servants trotted to markets or homewards with the end of a long golden loaf protruding from their baskets. Work-girls sped by in all directions. Omnibuses lumbered along as at midday. Before the great cafes opposite, the tables were already set out on the terrace and the awnings lowered, and white-aproned waiters stood expectant. The whole scene was bathed in the gay morning sunshine. "It is good to be alive, Asticot," said my master. "It is good to be in Paris. It is good to get up early. It is good to see the world's work beginning. It is also good to feel infernally hungry and to have the means of satisfying one's desires. But as, in the absence of Blanquette, my establishment is disorganized, I think we had better have our breakfast at Crémerie than in the Rue des Saladiers. We can talk over our coffee." I accompanied him across the street in a muddled condition of intellect, casting sidelong glances at him from time to time, as if to assure myself that he was real. Having just come from an English environment, where the niceties of costume were as rigidly observed as the niceties of religion, I could not help marvelling at Parago's attire. He looked like a 10th-rate French provincial actor made up to represent a duke, and in a country where none but actors and footmen are clean-shaven, this likeness was the more accentuated. Also, the difference between Parago hairy and bearded, and Parago in his present caddo state, was that between an old unbroken hazelnut and its bald, shrivelled kernel. We entered the Crémerie, sat down and ordered our coffee and crisp horseshoe loaves. I think the petit déjeuner at a Crémerie is one of the most daintily served meals in France. The morning dew glistens so freshly on the butter. The fringed napkin is so spotless. The wide-mouthed cups offer themselves so delicately generous. If everyone breakfasted there, crime would cease. No man could hatch a day's iniquity amid such influences. When we were halfway through, Parago unbuttoned his frock-coat and took from his pocket a black-edged letter, which he flourished before my eyes. It was then that I noticed, to my great surprise, that he had cut his fingernails. I thought of Madame Boin. "It is from the Comtesse de Verneuil, and it gives you the word of the enigma." "Yes, master," said I, eyeing the letter. "Confess, my little Asticot," he laughed, "that you are dying of curiosity." "You would tell me," said I, "that it was no death for a gentleman." "You have a way of repeating my unsaid epigrams which delights me," said he, throwing the letter on the table. "Read it." I read as follows: Château-Marlier, Pré du Nevers, 13th of August, 18... My dear Gaston, the newspapers may have told you the news of my husband's death on the 1st of August. Since then I have been longing to write to you, but I have not found the strength. Yet I must. Forgive me for the cruel things I said on the last unhappy night we met. I did not know what I do now. Before my husband died, he told me the true circumstances of the money transaction. My husband bought me, it is true, Gaston, but you did not sell me. You sacrificed all to save my father from prison and me from disgrace. You have lived through everything, a brave, loyal gentleman, and even on that hateful night you kept silent. But, oh, my friend, What misery it has been to all of us! I shall be in Paris on the 28th, Hotel Meurice. If you care to see me, will you make an appointment? I would meet you at any place you might suggest. The flat in the Avenue de Messine is dismantled, and besides, I shrink from going back there. Yours sincerely, Joanna de Verneuil. You see, my son, what she calls me, a brave, loyal gentleman, he cried with his pathetic boastfulness. Thank heaven she knows it. I've kept the secret deep in my heart all these years. One must be a man to do that, eh? He thumped his heart and drank a draught of coffee. Then he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He eyed the brown stain disgustedly. That, said he, is Parago peeping out through Gaston de Nerac. You will have observed that in the polite world they use table napkins. The Comtesse de Verneuil, said I, bringing back the conversation to more interesting matters, writes that she will be in Paris on the 28th. It was the 28th yesterday. I am aware of it. I have been aware of it for a fortnight. Yesterday I had a long interview with Madame la Comtesse. It was very satisfactory. Today I pay her a ceremonious visit at 11 o'clock. At 12 I hope you will also pay your respects and offer your condolences to Madame. You ought to have a silk hat. But, master, I laughed, if I went down the Boul' Mich' in a silk hat, I should be taken up for improper behaviour. You at least have gloves? Yes, master. Remember that in this country you wear both gloves while paying a call. You also balance your hat on your knees. Madame de Verneuil is English, I remarked. She has learned correct behaviour in France, he replied, with the solemnity of a professor of department. You will have noticed in her letter, he continued, how delicately she implies that the Hotel Meurice would not be a suitable rendezvous. In my late inclination I doubtless would have surprised the Hotel Meurice. I should have pained the head porter. In my live character of Gaston de Nerac I command the respect of flunkeydom. I give my card. He produced from his pocket and flourished in the air an ornate, heavily printed visiting card of somewhat the size and appearance of the 3 of spades. I felt gratefully awed by the sight of this final emblem of respectability. I give my card, he repeated, and the Hotel Meurice prostrates itself before me. While Parago was playing on the lighter side of the conjuncture, my mind danced in wonder and delight. I read the letter, which he left in my hands, several times over. He was cleared in Joanna's eyes. Nay, more, he stood revealed a hero. The generous ardour of youth bedewed my eyelids. Master, I cried, this must be wonderful news for you. He nodded over his coffee cup. You are right, my little Astigo. It is, he answered gravely. When I called at the Hotel Meurice at noon, I was conducted with embarrassing ceremony to Madame de Verneuil's private sitting-room, and on my way I rehearsed, in some trepidation, the polite formula of condolence which Parago had taught me. When I entered, the sight of Joanna's face drove polite formulae out of my head. She was dressed in black, it is true, but the black only set off the shell pink of her cheeks and the blue of her eyes, which were no longer frozen, but laughed at me, as if a visit of condolence were the gayest event possible. It is good of you, Mr. Asticot, to come and see me. Mr. de Nerac tells me you have travelled straight from Somerset in order to do it. How is the West Country looking? I am of the West Country myself. One of these days you will let me show it you. I like him much better, Gaston, dressed like an Englishman, instead of in that dreadful student get-up, which makes him look like a brigand. Yes, England has agreed with him. Oh, do take off your gloves and put your hat down. I am not a French mamma, with a daughter whose hand you are asking. Gaston, I am sure you told him to keep on his gloves. I am responsible for his decorum, Joanna, said my master solemnly. I noticed that he too had discarded hat, gloves, and umbrella, which lay forlorn on a distant table. Still, his coat was buttoned, and he sat bolt upright on his chair. Madame de Verneuil's silvery voice rippled on. She was girlishly excited. I have persuaded Mr. de Nerac to lunch with me, she said happily, and you must do the same. Will you ring the bell? We'll have it up here. And now tell me about Somerset. Never was there a sweeter lady than mine. Yes, I call her mine, and with reason. Was she not the first vision of gracious womanhood that came into my childhood's world? Up to then, woman to me was my mother and Mrs. Housekeeper. Joanna sprang magically, as in an Arabian night, out of an old stocking. Never was there a sweeter lady than mine. She welcomed me as if such things as wash-tubs, tambourines, café delphines, and absentiated paragots had never existed, and I were one of her own people. "How I long to get back!" she cried, when I had told her of my modest exploits at the Ewings. "I've not been to Melford for 5 years. When will you come, Gaston?" They had evidently made good use of their previous interviews. "I am going to live in England," she explained. "At first I shall stay with my mother at Melford. She is an old friend of Mr. de Narac's. Oh, Gaston, she does so want to see you. I have told her the whole story. Of course she knew all my poor father's affairs. And I have a cousin whose people live at Melford too. Major Walters. I don't think you know him. A dear fellow. He's just been at Nevers helping me to settle up things. He is my trustee. You must be great friends." "I remember the name," said Parago. "Why, of course you ought to," she cried prettily, with a laugh and a blush. "I had forgotten. You were pleased to be jealous of him. Mr. Asiko, you will have to forgive us for dragging memories out of the dust-heap. It is all so very long ago." "Dear me!" Her face grew pathetic. "It is very long ago, Gaston." 13 years, said he. I calculated. Joanna was a grown-up woman about to be married when my age was 6. I suddenly felt very young indeed. The waiters set the lunch. Joanna, most perfect of hostesses, presided gaily, cracked little jokes for my entertainment, and inspired me with the power of quite elegant conversation. Parago preserved his correct demeanour, and, to my puzzledom, spoke very little. I wondered whether the repressive influence lay in the spats or the purple cravat with the yellow spots. As a painter, I didn't like the cravat. He drank a great deal of water with his wine. I noticed him once pause in the act of conveying to his mouth a bit of bread held in his fingers with which he had mopped up the sauce in his plate, and furtively conceal it between his cutlet bones, a manoeuvre which at the time I could not understand. In the Quartier Latin we cleaned our plates to a bright polish with bits of bread. How else could you consume the sauce? At the end of the meal, Joanna gave us permission to smoke. "I won't smoke, thank you," said Parago politely. "Rubbish!" laughed Joanna, whereupon Parago produced a cigarette case from the breast pocket of his frock coat. Parago and a cigarette case! Once more it was abracadabra. He also refused cognac with his coffee. After a time, still feeling that I was very young, and that my seniors might have further confidential things to say to each other, I rose to take my leave. Parago rose too. "I would ask you to stay, Gaston, if I hadn't my wretched lawyer to see this afternoon. But you'll come in for an hour after dinner, won't you? No one knows I'm in Paris. Besides, at this time of year there is no one in Paris to know." "Willingly," said Parago. "But les convenances?" Joanna's pretty lips parted in astonishment. "You preaching the proprieties? My dear Gaston!" I turned to the window and looked out at the Tuileries gardens, which baked in the afternoon sun. Two spoke a little in low voices, but I could not help overhearing. "Is it true, Gaston, that you wanted me all these years?" "I want you as much now as I did then." "I too," whispered Joanna. End of chapter 15.